If you didn't realize this already, the UFC is desperate, making Paddy Pimblett a star in the UFC. And look no further than the matchmaking we got the other day, as he's going to be taking on Tony Ferguson at UFC 296. And I'm sure a lot of you watching this video had the same reaction I did, which was just like shaking your head. Like, it's very obvious what the UFC is trying to do here. They are trying to get Paddy Pimblett a win over a notable opponent. Mind you, this opponent is not the opponent we had from a couple years ago, right? I mean, this is the Tony Ferguson. This is the tail end of his career, Tony Ferguson. And let me just start this video off by saying that Tony Ferguson is an absolute legend. This is a guy who had an incredible win streak, exciting to watch in the octagon, really unorthodox, very different guy. He had a huge fan, still has a huge fan following. A lot of people love watching Tony Ferguson fight, but Tony Ferguson right now, at the time we're recording this in 2023, is the 2.0 version of BJ Penn. He's lost 6 in a row. He's had issues outside the cage as well. Remember the DUI he had a couple months before fighting Bobby Green. Remember the whole issue with him and his wife, before, I think it was, he's either supposed to fight Poirier or Holloway was supposed to fight him. I can't remember. It was one of those ones, but Holloway ended up fighting Poirier because of this. There's a lot going on in Tony Ferguson's life that's not going well. And this is honestly sad, like the thumbnail of this video suggests here, because Tony Ferguson deserves a lot better than Paddy Pimblett on the end of his career here. Now, look, I think Paddy Pimblett, when he first came in the UFC, let's might as well talk about him a little bit here. I thought when Pimblett came in the UFC, he was someone that I was like, okay, I'm willing to give this guy a shot, because it was not an easy road to the UFC. He had a couple setbacks along the way. Remember, he was trying to figure out if he was going to fight at featherweight or not. But he makes it to the UFC, had the great debut. And then stuff's starting to unravel a little bit, right? He had the whole issue with Ariel Helwani, where he was asking Ariel to basically pay him to do an interview. I did a whole video on this already. You can find it here on the channel. So there's that, and I think fans are kind of like, "What are you doing, man? Like, you're not that big of a deal." And then he fights Jared Gordon in his last fight, which is a fight that I don't think he won at all. That's a fight where, even if you go on MMA decisions right now, it's not the be all end all, obviously, but UFC 282, one media member scored the fight for Pimblett. And that guy might have to have a word with him. But look at this. All Jared Gordon thought that he clearly won. Look how many people had it 30-27 as well. I also thought he won 30-27 in that fight. Jared Gordon, I don't use this word very often. Jared Gordon got robbed in that fight. He absolutely got robbed in that fight. And I think the UFC saw that and they're like, okay, maybe he's not as good as we think he is. So we got to give him another fight, but we can't just give him nobody, because they gave him his Luigi Vendorminis and these other names that he fought earlier in his career, Rodrigo Vargas. Like, where are these guys? And they can't give him a Jared Gordon, obviously, because it's too risky. Let's give him Tony Ferguson, who's lost 6 in a row, probably shouldn't be fighting, and is a shell of himself and has not won a fight since before the pandemic. Let's give him that. And that's exactly what they're trying to do here. They're trying to get Paddy a win. Ferguson, I think the only sort of threat you have if Paddy's like worried about losing is a guy that has knockout power. You have to go all the way back to, the fight with, I mean, these were doctor stoppages. They weren't even like TKO wins or anything. I mean, he's got some submission wins, but Paddy Pimblett, I'm trying to remember the last time he's even been submitted. I don't think he has, actually. Cameron Else. Okay, way back in 20. Yeah, you have to go back almost 10 years the last time he was submitted. And honestly, Ferguson is not getting a lot of stoppage wins these days. Again, he hasn't won a fight in his last 6. So there's really no threat there. The way to beat Pimblett, I think, is if he fights a power puncher, he could get knocked out, right? Doesn't have to worry about that against Tony Ferguson. Let's just do a quick tail of the tape to kind of show what I mean here, right? 25-9 for Ferguson. Paddy Pimblett, not that far behind in fights. 39 years old at 28, huge age gap. 5'11 to 5'10, so Ferguson going to be a little bit taller and a little bit of a reach advantage as well. But the problem is Ferguson does not have much of a threat in this fight. Like I said, he does not finish fights. And just look at his last fight against Bobby Green. That was a fight where, again, got finished in that fight again. Got finished by Nate Diaz in the fight before. Like, again, Nate Diaz, not exactly a contender in any sort of division. Now, this was a tough run earlier on, right? This was sort of the beginning of the end for him. And that's kind of where we saw him really fall off a cliff. But it's not even because Ferguson, I think, skills have diminished. I think it's the age. I think it's the injuries. I think it's so many different things. Tony thinks in his head that he's still the guy that was, on this nice win streak, the guy who was supposed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, the guy that beat Kevin Lee. I think that's the Ferguson, that he thinks he is in his head. And I'm sure some fans feel that way too, but we're not getting that Tony Ferguson. We're getting a guy that realistically should have not fought, maybe even after the Chandler fight when he got knocked out. Because that's typically when you start to see fighters really start to get in that scary category of they're getting finished all the time. And Ferguson's gotten finished in his last 3 fights. Like, he shouldn't be fighting. And again, I'm not trying to disrespect Ferguson here. The guy's an absolute legend, but it would be in his best interest, I think, if he found something else to do. Now, Paddy, I don't think will knock him out. Maybe he will, but Let's hope he doesn't. I think Ferguson's durable enough to hold this one up. Remember, it's only 3 rounds, but yeah, I just think this is just the UFC trying to like fool the casual fan and say, well, because this is what's going to happen. Let's just talk about the optics, and I'll give you my pick in this fight as well too. The optics of this is the UFC is going to sell this as, well, Paddy just beat a former interim champion. He beat I can already hear Joe Rogan, and again, this isn't Rogan's fault. The UFC is going to give him talking points. So they're going to be like, Paddy Pimblett got a win over the former interim champion and Tony Ferguson. And that was a breakthrough performance. Like, no, it isn't. He's supposed to win this fight. And if you don't believe me here, go look at the odds right now. Paddy Pimblett's almost a 4-1 favorite. These odds just opened up a couple days ago. They're going to be even higher come fight time. Paddy Pimblett's probably going to be 4-1, 5-1 favorite in this fight. And it's just because Tony Ferguson's not what he used to be, right? Like, again, it's sad. Like, a guy like Tony Ferguson, a legend like Tony Ferguson, should not be having to fight a Paddy Pimblett later in his career. And I feel bad for the people around Tony, because they should be like, no, you shouldn't take this fight. He should be fighting like a Jim Miller, like a veteran, someone that, like, kind of like his last fight. He shouldn't even be fighting. Let me just walk back on that. Tony Ferguson should not be fighting anymore. I think the Bobby Green was like the perfect type of matchup for him to just say, okay, I'm done. That's it. You fought the veteran. This was a fun fight on paper. Like, I didn't mind that fight too much, because I'm like, Bobby Green's getting up there too. It's no big deal, right? You're getting a fighter in Green who's also in this similar situation. Although Green, again, I think Green's further ahead than Ferguson in terms of being done. But I think at this point, I can understand that matchmaking. Even Nate Diaz, it's like, okay, and granted that was a last minute fight, but I mean, that was like a fun fight. It's like, okay, we're getting Ferguson's fighting guys that are veterans, that are notable names, that are also in a similar situation where they're not quite contenders anymore. But you're fighting Paddy. It's not the fact that, like, this isn't like when the UFC tried to do Khamzat Chimaev and Nate Diaz. Okay, that was just absolutely pathetic. They're like, okay, we're gonna get Chimaev to kill Nate Diaz. Fight never ended up happening. Of course, Diaz fights Ferguson and then gets a nice win there. But what this is like is that they're going to give Paddy kind of this gimme win, and then they're going to try and sell it to the casual fans and say, oh, what a win that was. Like I mentioned there with all the Rogan talk. Like, I could just see that happening after this. So, I just think optically, like, this is just kind of pathetic that the UFC is trying to go this route. Paddy should be fighting. If you don't want to, if they're worried about him losing to like someone like a Jared Gordon caliber, I mean, I'm sure there's other guys you could find. Like, I would almost rather Paddy fight your Luigi Vendramini's or someone like that, because I just think Tony Ferguson deserves better. I think he should have fought Green, gone off into the sunset. And let's say Ferguson wanted to ride out his contract here. Give him another veteran. Don't give him Paddy Pimblett, because again, now how the optics are going to look is that Paddy beat him and that Tony was never that good and all this different stuff. Like, that's what I know people are going to say after this fight. And those are not educated fans, by the way. I don't think I'm alone here. I think a lot of people feel the same way. Now, as far as a pick here, he might win by knockout. I mean, if you look at Paddy, he wasn't able to knock out Jared Gordon. I think Jared Gordon is able to get knocked out. He finished Jordan Levitt by rear naked choke. Paddy may win by submission here. I'm probably just going to go decision. I'll just go Paddy decision. I think, Paddy's coming off a bit of a layoff, right? It'll be a year since he last fought. He had the surgery. He's got those weight issues. I think he'll just edge out a decision, and then the UFC is going to sell this as, oh, he beat an interim champ, former interim champ, and then that's going to be his. And hopefully this is it for Ferguson, because, like, he shouldn't be fighting. Like again, and I know I'm just a guy behind a camera here, and there's probably going to be people, saying I'm disrespectful, but I'm saying this for the benefit of Ferguson. Like, I don't want to see this fight. I would rather see Paddy fight someone else, but UFC is so hell-bent on trying to make it a thing, and he's really not that good, that here we are. Now, could Paddy turn things around in his career? Maybe this is the start of something. Sure. I wouldn't put it past him, but yeah, not a fan of this at all, and I don't think I'm alone here. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. First off, what do you think of the matchmaking here? Like I said, it's obvious. They're trying to get Paddy the win. They're trying to get him back, technically back on track, because a lot of people felt like he didn't beat Jared Gordon. And who do you think wins this fight? Is there anyone here picking Tony Ferguson? And if you are, please tell me your prediction. But I'm going to say about 99% of people are picking Paddy Pimblett in this fight. And even if you go look, I'm just before we get out of here, I will show you how people are looking at this one. Wow, there's 28% of people picking Ferguson. I think that's people who just don't like Paddy, who are like, let's get it done. But I really don't think we're going to get Ferguson winning this, because I think the Ferguson we're getting now is nowhere close to the Ferguson that was in 2019. So we'll see what happens. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, at Lynch on Sports. And if there's any other videos you want me to do, I'm always trying to cover the news. You guys let me know in the comments. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.